All right. Hello and welcome to the Imagine Belonging at Work live podcast brought to you by Rhodes Perry Consulting. I'm your host, Rhodes. And to get started, I want to pick up one of my favorite books of today right now. It's called Together. It was written in 2020 by the current Surgeon General in the United States, Dr. Vivek Murthy, who authored the powerful treatise on the impact of loneliness and the benefits of human connection. And it draws on rich science, compelling personal stories, and honestly beautiful prose as it explores the high cost of loneliness and considers how individuals, societies, and governments can tackle the problem of promoting human connection by essentially building a belonging society. And what I really love about the book is that it discovered one of the most common underlying themes, really naming it, of ill health and loneliness without the exemption of wealth, education, or accomplishments. And the Surgeon General labeled this as an epidemic of loneliness and isolation. And he said that loneliness and isolation have been an underappreciated public health crisis that has harmed individual and societal health. And he went on to say that human relationships, connection, and belonging are truly the medicine that can allow us to heal and live healthier, more fulfilled, and productive lives. Now, in our belonging membership community, we recognize that one of the important ingredients to building this belonging society is the role of the workplace. Now, sadly, building belonging cultures at work has yet to take root. It feels elusive. It's a stretch for some of us even to permit ourselves to imagine what a belonging workplace can look and feel like on that full sensory level. And as George Washington Carver once said, without vision, there can be no hope. And fortunately today, we're joined by Dr. Cordell Carter, the Aspen Institute's founding director, who will inspire us to imagine what a belonging society can be, and will explore how the workplace can play a pivotal role in activating this vision. Dr. Carter is a transformative leader in championing democracy, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, and promoting the greater good. He serves as the Aspen Institute's Project on Belonging founding director, and his career journey is as diverse as it is impressive, spanning roles at the White House, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and IBM, to name just a few. So together, our conversation supports DEIB pros, along with other executives and leaders, and those on their way to joining us. Dr. Carter will share his Belonging Society vision, along with practical strategies on how our workplaces can play that key role in making this vision a reality. So Dr. Carter, thank you. Thank you for your patience as I got through that little intro there. Super excited that you're here today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. Well, I want to start first with an expression of gratitude for your role in leading the Aspen Institute's Project on Belonging. And to get us started, I want to acknowledge that, you truly have had an impressive and expansive career journey. And we've highlighted just a few of those well-recognized institutions that you've worked at. And I'd love for you to share a little bit more about the journey that led you to the Aspen Institute, and particularly your motivation to lead the Project on Belonging.
Sure. I used to study leaders a lot as a kid. I'm first generation to go to college, the son of a preacher man from Portsmouth, Virginia. But we had the fortunate opportunity to travel around the country at different military bases when my father was still serving the country in that particular manner. And you were exposed to different things. And I had a chance to just do experiments on myself. Like, how do I present myself in this new community? Am I a tough guy? Am I a jock? What am I? And it was a very interesting self-experimentation. Some would say I talked myself quite a bit. But I had a wonderful time just getting really good at integrating myself into new environments. It's one of my superpowers. Like, people are not afraid of me. I'm off-putting. All these traits, frankly, that would make you a really good preacher have, have, have served me very well. And so when I was in college, undergrad, this is in the mid-90s, I would, go to a who's guide for American leaders. So this is an old almanac. We have the web now. No need for that. But it's just giant tomes, right? Dusty tomes. And I would follow a few leaders, and really I would have notes on them. And when Access Database became big in the mid-90s, I started creating my own Access database to teach myself how to build these things. And the goal was to create a decision support system that would help me decide what I wanted to be when I was big. So, I kept seeing the Aspen Institute just over and over again, references to the Aspen Institute. So it became like this mysterious organization, third rail type place. I was like, is it like the Trilads? What is this thing? How do I get in? I put that aside, as I started my career, left grad school, went to IBM, and then law school, and then living abroad in Germany, and then came back to the US to work in K-12 education reform with Seattle Schools and the Broad Foundation. Was recruited to go to DC to work with Business Roundtable to be a lobbyist for education. And that's when I ran to the Aspen Institute again. They came to my office, one of the gentlemen, and he said, "You'd be great for Socrates." I'm like, "What is that?" And he says, "This is a group of thoughtful leaders that debate ethics and values in the world today." I said, "I'm in. Count me in. I don't care where it is. I'm in." Right. So I go to Aspen that first winter of 2012, and the topic was social media and society. That was the topic, 2012. At that point, I wasn't on social media. I just had Facebook. To me, that was social media. But they were talking about Twitter and all these other things that were out then. And I had a magical intellectual experience. It was so rejuvenating. And I said, this is something I would like to create. So for the next 5 years, I'm running my startup after leaving the Gates Foundation in Chattanooga. I'm an Eisenhower Fellow to China during the presidential election of 2016. All the while, I'm recruiting people to go to Aspen to different seminars. And when I get back from China, December 2016, I get cornered by the Institute while I was in DC. They said, "Listen, it's time for you to join us." And I said, "Oh, let's talk." And before I knew it, I had said yes. And the last 7 years have been incredible. So how did I get to the Project of Belonging? So after January 6th, I was actually traveling with my parents. It was a post-COVID celebration trip. We were in Colombia. I had taken them to Palenque, which is a place established in 1603. It's the first fort, that fortified presence of self-freed or self-emancipated African slaves. Right, and so we visited. It was amazing, and we're on the beach, January 6th on the beach. And then my dad says, "Hey, when did CNN start playing movies?" I'm like, "What are you talking about?" He says, "I think they're playing Empire's Fallen." Look, and I look, and I'm like, and then I start getting text messages. "Are you okay? Are you okay?" I'm like, "What is going on?" And so we figured it out that the Capitol was under attack. It was my father's a military veteran. He was so upset, he just got up and went back to the hotel. Okay. So mom was like, "What's going on?" And he was just really angry. He didn't want to see us. He didn't want us to see him, emoting. We're all super annoyed. I get back to the US 2 days later. CEO calls me and says, "Hey, Cordell, I need your help." I'm like, "How can I be helpful?" He says, "It's time for Aspen to build an external D&I program." I said, "Great, let me find you a D&I person," because I'm not that. I have avoided D&I with a passion my entire corporate career.
Yep.
And he says, "I know you're not a D&I expert, but you're an Aspen expert. And the reason things don't work at Aspen is because people don't understand who and what we are. So I need you to take your Aspen brain and apply it to something else." And I said, "Okay, that I can do." So I started talking to the elders. But remember, this is not my space, or had not been my space. And I'm trying to figure out what is the proper role for Aspen in this national conversation or a national obsession. And so I started blending the things that I really love. American history, for one, this notion of discovering a new narrative, a narrative of inclusion. I call it becoming an inclusive republic. And thus we launched a Project of Belonging, because it's not about where the conversation is now, it's where it should be. And Aspen's job is to give leaders a normative critique on the conversations they're having today. And so belonging became the goal, and everything else falls under that. So in a subsequent questions, I'm sure we can get to, like, my theory of change with respect to those things, or theory of action. But for me, it's about sequencing. It's not about replacing anything. It's about putting things in proper sequence and tying strategies to an actual plan, to an actual outcome. And then people are somewhat allayed. They're like, "Okay, I get it now. I get it. You're not seeking to replace me. You're seeking to create a place for a lot of me's and everybody else." Yes, that's where we're going. And I think, frankly, it has to be led by the private sector, because the private sector has no choice but to deal with data. Private sector and the military, they have to deal with data, because that's their fiduciary duty. Our governments are run by people who need to win an election. Therefore, everything is short term. Everything is cyclical, because no one is rewarded for thinking long term. There's no reward structure for it. And so it's going to be led by private sector, civil society, and frankly, our armed forces.
I love that. And thank you for just kind of sharing that vision. I'd love to kind of dive more into the theory of change. You know, in so much of the work that I do, belonging is kind of that the vision, kind of like that is the emotional outcome if the plan and the strategy is consistent and sustainable over time to have just to recognize the diversity that exists in our workplaces, you know, in the context of this conversation, those inclusive behaviors, you know, the behavioral outcomes, and then kind of focusing in on equity, which is looking at systems, right, and trying to upend some of the inequities that live there, right? And that's you know, I think it was Pat Waiters at LinkedIn who once said, you know, I understand DEI and I need the heart connection, right? And so the belonging component, right? Like what you said, it's like we're finding a place for everyone. It's not about exclusion. This is the antidote to it. So I'd love, you know, just if you
Sure.
want to share a little bit more of that theory.
So here's how I see it. Number one, you got to get back to where did this all start? This started under Nixon.
Yeah.
Okay. I know Mr. Nixon has a certain reputation, and historically speaking, but before he kind of lost it, he did have some really remarkable things, EPA being one, but also just a really simple request of federal procurement officers. Could you ask the people who do business with government who works for them? How many women work for them? How many people of color work for them? I'm very interested. There was no federal objective to it, but considering that the U.S. federal government is the number one purchaser of goods and services for the country, I mean, it's responsible for 2/5 of GDP. And yet we keep saying we're capitalism, but that's a different story. It's a different story, right? So every company, every Fortune 1000 company, their biggest customer is the U.S. federal government. They don't exist without them, right? And so if your procurement officer of your largest company is asking you a question, it is not innocuous. Okay. It's not superfluous. It's a requirement.
Yeah.
And so a whole industry has been built up around making me look better. And then what the federal government also did, they started according points. Would say like the scale's 100 and you're responding to an RFP. They started tying diversity targets or metrics, if you will, to your ability to win a contract. And that's when it became the industry that we know today. But here's the issue, or frankly, the challenge. We've gone headlong to diversity, equity, inclusion. There are so many acronyms I'm not going to go into right now. As a strategy, we've made the strategy the thing without articulating where we're going with it. And so when I say it's about sequencing, the chief executive of the organization has to say, listen, everyone at Microsoft will know this is a place where they belong and have opportunities to thrive. Doesn't mean that you will thrive. It means you will have opportunities to thrive, right? In order to get there, because we know people come in at different, starting points. This is where equity comes in. The people inside the organization that are charged with implementing this idea of belonging have to utilize the strategies of DEI. But it is a strategy. There are other strategies to achieve it as well. But we tend to fixate on that which triggers. And frankly, given the shorthand in our political discourse, I'm not surprised. I mean, this has been going on ever since I've been an adult. In the 90s, I remember back when I was in college, there was an anti-affirmative action, this, that. There was a national consensus coming out of the 60s and 70s that we had to do better, that there were a lot of injustice, a lot of inequity that we had to make up for. And that takes time. We're 248 years old, and you don't get a solution that would change the impact of 248 years in a full swoop. But that is the amount of our attention span. If I don't see a result in the next 30 minutes, it must be wrong. And so I think a lot of our animus could be solved if we articulate where we're going. And frankly, and this is more controversial, and I'll admit that, we have to mourn people's sense of loss, whether or not we deem it a justifiable sense of loss. I'm specifically speaking to middle-aged white men who are looking across the demographic landscape and not seeing a lot of people who look like them. Okay? To them, that is a loss. To everyone else, it's demographics. That's what happens. By the way, whiteness has never been a majority of the world, in case you didn't know that, right? But in this country, it was. Yeah. Even though it was manufactured, it was. And that meant something to people. And so we can't just dismiss their sense of loss, because if you dismiss it, they may go quiet because it's impolite, but they will vote in a certain way. They'll communicate online in a certain way. They'll hire a certain way. 70+% of all executive roles in this country, regardless of sector, are held by white men. So you can't dismiss them. They are part of the solution. But who wants to be part of a solution that eradicates their presence? That's not what humans do. We fight to survive. And so let's speak to our common humanity and this need to belong, also the need to feel like you're surviving and that you can replicate yourself somehow, some way. So
Yes.
anyhow, so I think when I think about belonging, I'm sequencing number one. What is your executive team saying to the rest of the organization? Moreover, how do you measure it? And so if it's not tied to P&L, this is one of my core theories of action. Frankly, it's nice to have until it's not nice to be had. And
Mhm.
so I think it's a responsibility of people who really care about these issues to tie the work to the P&L. Like this is actually driving revenue or whatever revenue looks like for that organization. It could be nonprofit, you're driving impact. Either way, you have to prove it. And once you've proved it, it's not a D&I issue. It's a P&L issue.
Yeah, I'm just jotting down notes. I'm really glad like the kind of two things. I mean, there's so much richness in your response, kind of addressing objections, right? Addressing kind of the loss aversion for kind of the dominant group of people in the business community, white men, people who look like me, right? That loss aversion is so powerful though, because it's it's kind of like an economics theory, right? Like the thought of losing something like money, for example, is 2 times greater than kind of the pleasure of gaining something, right? So just
Yeah,
that
yeah,
alone, kind of human behavior, getting over
yes.
that requires us to look at it, to name it like you just did. And then, like you said, kind of reframing, thinking about the promise of belonging, that there is a
Mhm.
place for everyone, right?
Absolutely.
And that might look different, right? But
Mhm.
and thinking about what's gained, right? Which is kind
Mhm.
of getting into that vision that I'm really curious, in the work that you're doing, it's clear you're a visionary, right? Like as a younger person, just kind of imagining, recreating yourself every time your family had to move for a new military assignment, right? Like you're thinking about like what's kind of this new version of myself, right? And just kind of applying that to this impressive work that you're leading around building a belonging society. What does that look like? What does that feel like on a full sensory level? Because that vision is kind of like our North Star. That's where we're
Mhm.
moving towards, hopefully, if people can
Yeah.
see themselves as a part of that vision, right?
Yeah. In order for me to really articulate like the why of the three streams of work under belonging, you also have to understand like my personal uh, evolution. At some point in our lives, and I think mid 40s is about right, you start to really contemplate like what are my second half adjustments, right? Actuarially speaking, I have classmates that have passed away. Okay. I know that my mortality is limited. One day it's going to be my turn. So how do I want to be remembered? And for me, my uh, moment was late June 2020. My father had contracted COVID. This is pre-vaccine. He contracted it it was the week after George Floyd was killed. And there were protests all over the American South. They were tearing down Confederate statues. And my father was there, part of the Black Ministerial Alliance, trying to calm the kids down. They were coming to the protest with bobcats. You know what a bobcat is? A little small tractor.
Oh yes, yeah.
Yeah, they came with bobcats and tether line to tear these statues down. In my
Wow.
home city of Portsmouth, Virginia, the sheriff is can prosecute if the elected DA declines. The elected DA already said they were going to decline, so now the sheriff and his men were there with billy clubs, and it was giving all the folks that were around in the '60s some PTSD. It's like, are you kidding me? Like this still happens when we had Paul, my neighbor is my dad's neighbor is a state senator. She was arrested. Everyone was jostled about these older Black gentlemen, ministers trying to pray over it. Were jostled about, knocked down, mask is torn off. 8 of the 12 got COVID. 7 of the 8 died. Okay. My father is the only one who didn't die. And my mother, just before we knew he was in the clear, my mother called me and she says, baby, your sisters are useless right now. They're over the top emotion. I need you before things take a turn for the worse, because his next step is to be intubated. You and I both know he's not going to make it if he's intubated, given the state of his lungs. Uh, we got to start planning the Zoom memorial now. And I said, okay, I'll come up soon, right? So I'm sitting there trying to figure out who's going to sing for dad. Normally, in our religious order, that's a 5-hour homegoing ceremony. It's basically a concert. Anyone who's ever loved this person is going to sing them a song, whether they were invited to sing or not. Everyone's going to sing, right? And so I say, who can I afford to offend? Because on Zoom, it's like really hard to have a lot of singers. So I'm going to do 2 or 3 maximum. And so I flipped the question on myself because I'm reflecting on my dad's 50 years of ministry, essentially. And I know, you know, there's a lot of people that want to say goodbye to him and wanted to honor him. And I had to flip the question on myself. And I'm like, frankly, my folks back home, they don't care about LinkedIn. They don't care what's in my CV. Who am I living this life for? Really? They don't care what IBM is, how long they've been existing. No one cares. At the end of the day, it's not going on your epitaph. It's the date you started, the date you ended, everything in between is what matters. And so I had to really do that self-inventory and say, okay, what is it that I'm trying to leave this world with? And for me, it's a civic ministry. I can't do what dad does. I'm not so inclined. But I do feel like I minister in a way. And so then you reach this question of convergence, like the things you're good at doing, the things you were trained to do, and the things you were born to do. When those things converge, work disappears.
Right.
And you've tapped into that frequency of production and creativity. And like I said, it's like you hit the universal om and everything makes sense. And you're just moving with the groove. You're dancing to music no one else hears, right? But you're producing. And so that is how the Project of Belonging really took flight, because I was ready the next year when my CEO called. I was already thinking about those things. And so I said, okay, leadership experience is number one. It has to be a core competency of what we do. So what that looks like there is what I call professional learning communities. And these are leaders that are in the private sector. I'm real clear about that, either nonprofit or private sector. I don't want government, all with due respect, that have P&L responsibilities, but they also care about issues of equity and inclusion. Moreover, they are actually building strategies that are tied to P&L, strategies that can be replicated. So let's put them in playbooks, let's put them in guides, and let's shoot it out. That was inspired by summer of 2021 with Sherm. I did a documentary called The Road Trip to Belonging. And I interviewed all these Southern chief diversity officers. And my conversation with Ben Hassan, who was then SVP for global diversity at Walmart, was quite remarkable. And so much of it didn't make the film because we couldn't. He was like, I'll be honest, but turn the cameras off. I said, good, I'll take all that wisdom. One of the things he said that was on film, that 75% of his colleagues, now this is July 2021, 75% of his colleagues and his peers got their job after George Floyd was killed. So he was killed on a Sunday. On Monday, you had the Black Squares. It's also Memorial Day, Black Squares. On Tuesday, a lot of the companies realized we don't have any people of color to report directly to CEO. And so they started pulling folks out, regardless of what their training was. They were now chief diversity inclusion officer reporting to the CEO with all the responsibilities they're in. But there was lack of strategy, budget, team. It's like horses running free, okay? And so we shouldn't be surprised that of the backlash, number one. And secondly, that they have no idea what does this role serve. So imagine you're sitting at that table, you're VP for sales, and you have another VP across from you that doesn't have that same P&L pressure. That doesn't feel good. Do you think you'd be super nice about talking about that person's work? Probably not. That's human behavior, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to do compare and contrast regardless, right? So the purpose of this PLC at Aspen, and we're doing like these quarterly gatherings, is to get people interested in actually sharing what they do best with the market. Okay, that's going to move the entire body of work forward. So that's that. Number two is the actual convenings. We have a big one that starts in 27 days called the Festival Diaspora, and that's based in, it's going to be in Rio de Janeiro. But we're taking leaders from all over the Americas and just changing their space, if you will. About 200 people kind of go every year. We've been in San Juan, we've done Cartagena, Colombia, and now we're in Rio de Janeiro. And the idea is to get you in a different place to have a conversation about those same issues. But I want you to globalize it a bit, because our notions of identity in the USA are so different from these different diaspora communities. You know, the largest Japanese diaspora outside of Japan is Sao Paulo. Okay. And so the way they think about Asian identity is just very different than a US-based Asian American, all right? They don't have a hyphen, okay? And they're fine with that. I'm Brazilian of Japanese descent. Okay, what does that mean? How does that show up in the workplace? You know, all these really interesting dialogue you can't really have in the US. And so then they go back to the US with a more global perspective that frankly puts them a lot closer to P&L, especially if they're a large organization, right? But it's also what I call the secular tent revival, because we're not just worker bees, we're complete human beings. And we have very few opportunities to take off this corporate avatar and just be people, just be learners. I mean, I think that's one of the reasons I love Aspen so much, is because I don't care about your title. Once you're in a seminar room, you're just a learner.
Yeah.
I said, how can we scale this in a way that doesn't cost $5,000 a pop? Okay. How can we scale that? All right.
Yeah.
And so that's what the Diaspora is about. And now we're moving to global talent and training. It's really growing. It's fantastic. And then the last big convening we're looking to do, if you recall, from 2000 to 2010, is a gentleman by the name of Tavis Smiley had a national event called the State of the Black Union. I said, that's fantastic. And it served its purpose for that time. But now we need to be talking about belonging in our union. What does that look like? And how do we elevate these voices that don't typically have a conversation like this in a safe intellectual place? How can we make national dialogue safe? I think that's part of our problem, is that people only feel safe to express themselves online, which leads to digital thuggery. You communicate online in a way that you would never communicate in person because you have accountability when I'm across from you. We're two men. There's a certain zone you're not going to go in because you don't know if I may thrash you. You don't know what I'm capable of if I'm offended. Okay. But we have that kind of detente of politeness in normal human connections. But this digital space has created a cloak of invincibility, and everyone is a tough guy online, and we're not having genuine dialogue. We're just there to troll each other. I'm like, this can't be good for humanity. So we have to find more spaces for people just to be human, to connect with our common humanity, to realize we're all like those aspen trees you see on a grove. These aren't independent trees. That's a common root system, okay? They're connected. They can communicate. They're just like us. We have our common humanity. Even though we look different, we have our common humanity. And then the third part is actually a cohort experience. And here, the question that is before my head is, what does the 21st century civil rights leader look like? Okay? It's not a look, by the way. It's not appearance. It's about the trainings that they have, the skill sets. So instead of being great orators, they will be amazing data analysts. They can take a data set and say, okay, I want to impact underestimated communities. Let me look at your data, your impact data. Who's underestimated you? Because invariably, we know what those people are going to look like. So I don't need to go in with my policy that says I want to impact Black women and then watch myself be sued. No, I want to impact women, people who do not get funding typically for these entrepreneurial pursuits. Many of them will be Black and brown. I can promise you that's going to be the case. Okay. But if you change the way you talk about the work and have it data focused, it's defensible. Moreover, we have to understand algorithms better. User-generated algorithms actually coming from the people that you're seeking to serve rather than imposing something on them. What does that look like when you're leading a nonprofit? What does that look like when you're a divisional manager of IBM? The goal is to create a common leadership experience that is vested in the American story that will lead to massive change by a new set of leaders for this generation. I believe we're in a fourth founding of this country. And that fourth founding is this post-civil rights era. And I call it the moral reckoning of the 2020s. And it requires a new set of leaders. And these leaders are going to be quantitatively sound. They're going to have completely different training. Many of them be privileged, so to speak. They come from great backgrounds, but they're going to have the same spirit as those freedom riders from 60 and 61 who turned their bodies into living sacrifices just because they wanted the country to be a better place. They didn't have to do a damn thing. Those kids, those Jewish and Catholic kids from Michigan, from Iowa, they were fine. They put their families' esteem on the line to protect people who had no choice. Like if you're a Southern civil rights worker in the 60s, life sucks. And so if you're killed, at least you're killed doing something amazing, right? That's gonna move the country forward. Well, having those essentially bodyguards changed the game because the world got to see the brutality of American law enforcement trying to essentially sustain apartheid. And so that's what I'm trying to invoke. Like, what does that look like in a more clinical sense? What are those trips like? Because we're not going to Aspen, we're not going to Rome. Okay, we're going to Atlanta. We're going to Stonewall. We're going to a place where the American story is actually unfolding and has unfolded. We're going to walk the Pettus Bridge. We're going to the Anti-Slavery Museum. Okay, we're going to go to these sacred grounds where indigenous peoples have been slaughtered just for existing. That's the American story. Good, bad, and different. Let's take it all and let's do something with it. So those are the parts of the project of belonging. I'm really focusing on the convenings right now, obviously, because they're a little easier to do. But we hope to continue to build momentum for the cohort experience.
Okay, Cordell, that response was incredible, just kind of the theory of change. And I had so many different questions. And I think where I landed on where I'm going to go next is, you convene leaders all over the world. You're impacting over 1,000 leaders every year, probably more, right? And the vision that you just laid out, that theory of change, like how we get there, how do you democratize that for the folks that don't have access to join you, right? Or you don't have the resource. The Aspen Institute can't bring every person engaged in this kind of work to the locations that you're at. Is there a way? Because when I was doing research for the work that you're doing, I went to the website and there's like a little paragraph that doesn't really serve like that beautiful response that you just shared,
Yeah.
and maybe that's by design, right? Because you're trying to kind of protect some of this work. And
Yeah.
people need what you're doing. It's brilliant. It's brilliant. So I'm sure you have lots of
Yeah.
ideas on that. Like how
Well,
that info?
let's be real for a second.
Yeah.
Aspen is a great organization, but we battle with the same issues
Mhm.
or theory of action that other similar organizations battle with. And that is you have a group that's focused that believe that the top 1% of leaders are most capable of propagating massive change. So we should focus our efforts on them. And you have a group that believes that leadership is far more little d democratic or little c Catholic, and that people can lead from a variety of stations. And so the battle we have, our titanic battle, if you will, is having programs and a certain theory of action and frankly a certain branding that this is just for elite leaders. If you're not a Supreme Court justice or a CEO, you probably can't afford to go to Ideas Festival. Why the ticket is $8,000, right?
Yeah.
And then other groups like me, my group, Socrates and Project on Belonging, that are intentionally pricing things so they're widely acceptable and accessible to people. But even with all of that, you realize that this is still grass tops or maybe even grass blades. The real work is at grassroots. And frankly, all three in concert is the best solution. And so a part of the work of civic ministry is a grassroots work. I'm like, if you remember Garrison Keillor, Prairie Home Companion? I love that show. It was one of my favorites. I grew up listening to that on Saturdays. I want to take a Garrison Keillor-like approach to belonging. And frankly, I don't think I can do that at Aspen. I'll be frank with you. Okay. They know this. This is why I'm kind of constricting my time, really focus on discrete convenings so that you can do what I believe this work demands. We can't be civic ministry if we're not ministering to people, right? People that have been underestimated, that frankly would never get to experience this content but for us bringing it to them. And so I have great news for you. Great news. We're doing our first belonging bus tour in Indiana in April. And nobody at Aspen is funding it. No one who funds Aspen is funding it. These are all small local organizations. We're going to hit 3 different cities. Hopefully we'll end up at my alma mater, Notre Dame, to do a big convening on anti-poverty and frankly solutions to get us past this thing. And frankly, the role of a faith-based institution with problem solving. Okay, like, hey, it's not about building your coffers and your endowment. That is a metric of success, no doubt, but it's not a metric of impact. Real impact is real work. You got to do the work. And why not have some kids that have a faith orientation that believe you're supposed to make the world a better place in the front of that work? And so I think this is some very exciting, some developments. And frankly, the grand vision is that we do this big national event under the Aspen flag. This is belonging in our union. It's a fantastic organization to do something like of that scale when you're literally bringing 500 people from all around the world to one place for one day. That is Aspen all day long and twice on Tuesday. But that work in these different places, Wichita Falls, Jackson, Mississippi, that is is you got to get on the ground. You got to get your hands dirty for that, because you literally have to negotiate partnerships and navigate the politics of each place every single time. And so it requires a different level of effort and flexibility. And so I'm pleased that they've given me the flexibility to do that work and do it in concert with the work that I believe Aspen is best suited for. And so yeah, but I heard your point. I heard very well. I've been fighting this fight for a long time, and hopefully, I think we're at solution time now.
Okay, so your message, your work so resonates with me, and we share an alma mater. Notre Dame was also where I went, so
Go
there's a lot of
Irish!
good synergy right now. And
Yeah.
yeah, I have one more. I want to keep talking, and I definitely want, however this community can promote the bus tour that you're doing, the Belonging bus tour, and also the
Yes.
documentary that you did.
Yes.
Happy to get
I'll
that
put the
message
link in the
out there.
chat. Yeah, I'll put the link in
Yeah.
the chat.
Thank you. And we'll be sure to share that in our show notes.
Yeah.
So kind of last question, and then we're going to jump into our private Q&A session with our members. So, we're imagining, you shared the vision for the Belonging Society, which is grand and big. And for us, kind of where we're positioned, we're thinking about the future of work, imagining the future of work. So what advice can you share to really encourage us to keep leading the work that we manage today, while also really boldly sharing that vision, and ideally, I think a lot of our audience really resonates with what you're sharing, right? So how to share it with other emerging belonging champions, even when our voices waver. So many of us are facing, the impacts of backlash right now. So just looking for some inspiration, some final words from you on that.
I would say focus on the outcome and focus on the rectitude of your efforts. This is the right path, right? You're essentially prophets wherever you are. And as we know, the prophet is never loved in their hometown. That's just what it is, right? They only love you when they see your name in light somewhere else. And so know that belonging is the right language to use, and bundle things underneath that, and then get as quantitative as humanly possible. Fight them with data. The campaign, the active campaign, I don't know if you saw the Wall Street Journal article last week. There's an active cabal that is funded, well funded, and they're going after all forms of DNI wherever it lives. Okay, as they say, wherever it lives. And so you have to be just as savvy, just as organized to combat this attack. And so my strong advice is to nationalize the discussion. Number one, this is a national security risk. The country is what it is. You look at 350 million people, and you don't have 300 million white people. It is what it is, guys. Get over that part. Okay. Secondly, think about our standing in the rest of the world. Like I travel internationally twice a month. That blue passport with the eagle and the talons with the arrows in it, that means something. All right. And I want it to continue to mean something. But if we fight each other all day long, the world isn't waiting for us to figure ourselves out. Okay. They're going to move on without us. And all of a sudden you're an also ran. I don't want to be an also ran with that passport. Okay. I want to be the top dog, and I want all the smoke that comes with it. Okay. So speak to people's sense of patriotism and connect this work. So just got to be savvy, connect the dots, and come with your data.
Yes. Thank you for that, Cordell. This has been amazing. And we will share all of the links so that folks can find your work, support it, share it with other people, because those of us in doing the work every day, we really need to be reminded of that vision.
Yes.
And it's so powerful. So I really appreciate
it. If I can add one more thing.
Yeah, please.
The importance of self-care. Yes. We're on the front lines. Yeah. Schedule one day a month for just to do nothing. I call it Blue Sky Day. And I take the team to a museum, and there's no agenda. We're in DC, it's easy, right? Smithsonian. We walk around, we get inspired, we talk about the art or the exhibits, we have lunch, and then we go back to the office for half a day. And we never bring it up, but it's just a break that causes the brain to do something different. And the level of stress you're on, that cortisol goes away, and it's replaced by different chemicals, dopamine, serotonin, as you're enjoying just kind of, having a drink with the boss at lunchtime. Ooh, scary, right? But it's just something to get us out of our routine of constantly preparing the table for others to eat, because we starve ourselves. And then we wonder why you're running out of juice. Why am I so lethargic and tired? It's because you've expended everything in you for others and you haven't replenished it. So you have to get in the practice of replenishing yourself. Have some schedule to do it. I'm an every 15 days type of guy at this point. under a lot of stress, but this is
Yeah,
good stress because I'm up to good trouble. So this is good
yeah,
stress. And
yeah,
but I do want things to be great, and that's my level. That's my own issues. Always seeking excellence in everything that I do.
yeah.
But you got to refresh yourself. And so, I mean, the resort we're going to today for the seminar, guess what? World-class spa. Guess where I'll be before we start? World-class spa.
Yes, yes, I love that blue sky days, and it's so so important. Yeah, we've had a number of folks who um, have been on the show really talking about strategies to identify and kind of mitigate burnout. So just thank you for that. Thank you
Yeah.
for your presence and your time today. And for folks, if you're tuning in, watching this on LinkedIn or Facebook or YouTube, I want you to know that I really, really encourage you all to apply some of these lessons or take some of the vision that Cordell has generously shared with us and really bring it back into your workplaces, bring it back to home, engage in those conversations. If you want to connect with inspiring leaders like Cordell, be sure to check out the Belonging membership community. We're about to kind of jump into a private Q&A session now. And one of the great perks of the Belonging membership community is you get to attend workshops like what we have planned later today, which is a workshop called Set Your 2024 DEIB Vision. And if you're a member, you get to attend all of those great workshops for free. So thanks everyone for being here today. Thanks for growing the Belonging movement. We have a visionary leader here who is kind of giving us our North Star. So hope to see you at our next live podcast streaming. Thank you.